So I'm very happy to be doing a dialogue today with Jerry Hyde from London, UK. Welcome, Jerry.
Thank you.
And I found out about Jerry through a channel called Rebel Wisdom. And I watched an interview he did on that channel. And yeah, I really enjoyed his kind of edgy, no-nonsense approach and style. And then I checked out a documentary that Jerry's made featuring his men's group in London called Make Me a Man, which I found to be deeply moving, very, very beautifully done, deeply moving. So I really wanted to connect with you just to see, get a sense of your work with men and maybe to share some experiences and insights about this whole arena. So maybe we could begin then by you saying a little bit about how you got into doing men's groups. How did that all come about?
When you asked me just before we started this how to pronounce my name, if it's pronounced Hyde, and someone on another podcast recently said to me, "Is that your real name, or did you adopt that for your persona?" And I'm saddled with it. It's real, and I don't want to diss my dad. He's a troubled man who comes from the culture that I come from, and probably you come from. But he was definitely a Mr. Hyde in the kind of Jekyll and Hyde thing, and I think I tried quite typically, like a lot of guys. It's like, I'm going to be better than my dad. And I think the real moment of arrival, if there is such a thing, there wasn't a moment as such, I'm kind of mythologizing it, but when I had to face and accept I'm not better than my dad, I'm trying in a different culture with different resources to, my generation's fortunate. I think therapy and men's groups and things are, well, they weren't even around probably when he was young. But I think it was I went into work in domestic violence in the 90s with male perpetrators, semi-consciously, to not be like my dad and perhaps protect women from people like my dad. To be honest, I think it was the other way around. I think I went and started working in domestic violence, and then my mum started saying to me, well, your dad used to knock me around, which I hadn't known. So it was like a kind of semi-conscious thing I was pulled to. But I certainly didn't like men very much, apart from my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, who I was very, very close to, who died round about then. And there was also a semi-conscious pull towards men, because I think I didn't want my only positive male experience to die with him. So I started working with guys, and I think I joined a men's group for myself around about then. So we're probably talking 93, 94, something like that. And actually the men's group I joined was never terribly satisfying, but the work I started doing with perpetrators was, I think I encountered quite a broad cross-section of society. It's just private men's groups, which I run, do tend to be, the ones I run anyway, and the ones I've been in do tend to be quite narrow in, kind of people who can afford it, and generally white and middle class, which I think is changing. And I see that changing in my practice, and I see that beginning to change societally. Whereas, of course, in perpetrators groups and people who are sent through the judicial system, it's a much broader range of, race, background, what have you. But I really fell for them because I could see they weren't Mr. Hydes. They weren't terrible people.
Right.
They were people with a really narrow vocabulary that, regardless of class, which is, how strong that is in Britain still,
and
racial background or what have you, I mean, I got that message. I remember really clearly my dad saying, probably in the late 60s or early 70s when I was at primary school, you know, if anyone picks on you in the playground, probably the only piece of advice he ever gave me, if anyone picks on you in the playground, just punch them as hard as you can in the face.
Wow.
These guys had the same kind of solution to vulnerability, right?
Right, right.
And you take that into the playground, all right, whatever. I'm not saying, you know, already into Will Smith territory now. But, in an intimate relationship, that's clearly really not going to fucking work at all. But these guys, I'm not making excuses for them. I just think their range of responses when feeling vulnerable was really limited.
Mm.
And what I found was it was incredibly easy to change that
Mm.
just by creating a circle, giving them, you know, it was quite psychoeducational. It was based on the Duluth model, which is quite established in working with domestic violence. But, you know, body awareness, mental kind of, you know, tracking back their resentments, looking at the social kind of backgrounds they come from and the family attitudes towards violence. It's pretty easy to turn that around. You know, these were not kind of incredibly, well, some of them were incredibly violent, but they weren't. It wasn't incredibly hard to challenge that once you kind of gave them some options. And I think my conclusion was, when vulnerable, men have a very, you know, that very narrow range. But if you extend it and give them permission to be vulnerable, or different language or different options, that most of them wouldn't choose to be violent. I
Yeah.
think it was certainly towards women. It was much harder to convince men not to be violent to men, because that's what men do, right?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
someone would go out on a Saturday night looking for a fight because it was a kind of sport. But in an intimate relationship, I don't remember ever meeting a man who really wanted to be like that, and most of them were very ashamed. And it was always that moment where they go, "Oh, fuck, I'm just like my dad, aren't I?"
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's interesting. Have you generally found that, because you said once the men got in the circle with a few others, the access to that trust and vulnerability was relatively easy, and that's also
Only takes one to show a bit of emotion, and it gives everyone permission.
Mm.
I'm sure you know that through your work.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I mentioned it, because that's also been my experience. That interestingly, because we also have a women's collective in our community, and it's interesting because while women tend to be more relational than men in general, it's actually harder, we found, for the women to find that deep trust and vulnerability. It's easy. It seems to be easier with the men, and it's just interesting because the more competitive dynamics between men, you know, which are kind of, we all are kind of socially known and accepted. They're more on the surface, you know, and then the women's competitive dynamics are more under the surface. And so it's always amazing to me, especially when a new man comes into the group, how even on a non-verbal level, you know, just the experience of sitting in a circle with a group of men who are committed to being open, transparent. Yeah, it just opens a door that I think so many men don't know that door is possible, that it exists. You know, this is a big part of why I'm so passionate about this kind of work, because I think so many men are longing for this discovery of vulnerability and of brotherhood, you know, beyond going out with the guys for some beers and looking for a fight, like you said, or the football match. You know, we all, as men, we all generally tend to stay on that level and socially. But I have found also that, yeah, it's generally, once there's that fundamental trust, then men are quite willing to open up.
Yeah, I mean, the whole gender thing, you know, it's really not my field. I've never even thought about it till recently, in a conscious way. I've just worked with men.
Mm.
On the whole, we're kind of stuck with these labels, or maybe we're not. Maybe they'll get ditched.
Maybe.
Things get more fluid, but as long as we've got them, they have some value. They also have their issues. But you could argue, or I would argue, if we're going to go with gender stereotypes, that a men's group is essentially feminine, because it's a place where people come to commune, or what we associate with feminine.
Yeah, yeah.
It's where we come to commune, share, show our emotions, and a more stereotypical masculine model will tend to isolate. I mean, the real stereotype, in an English sense, is the man in his shed and the woman leaning on the garden fence, nattering to the neighbor, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of like the irony of, when we come together as men, we're essentially or immediately getting into a kind of feminine space. But at the same time, I would counter that. Like I say, I'm kind of making shit up, because I'm not on solid ground here. I don't know how many people are. I did I'm dabble. I'm not an expert by any means, or hugely experienced, but I've dabbled in plant medicines, and I did one called 5-MeO-DMT.
Oh yeah, I've done that too.
Yeah, which handed my ass to me very quickly. One of the things that I immediately got told, I mean, I can't remember it word for word now. I've got it written down somewhere, but it was essentially, I got a kind of affirmation. It's a voice said to me, "You are fragile. You are delicate. You are sensitive. You are these things that have been labeled as feminine, but they're not feminine.
Right.
They're kind of neither masculine nor feminine.
Right.
But they've been labeled as feminine, and they're actually things that men have been denied or have denied. And I think that there is a problem in gendering those kind of qualities. I mean, my favorite description of the quality that I would say I see going on in my groups on a good day anyway is tenderness, which is often seen as a feminine quality.
Yeah.
Perhaps it is, but I don't experience feminine tenderness the same as I experience masculine tenderness.
Exactly.
You know, I don't want to get hung up on the gender thing, but the problem for me with the gender thing is that it does make it taboo or prohibitive, or if you're too soft or sensitive, then you're gay or you're not masculine or what have you. And so it's a complex thing to navigate your way through that. And I'll just hit you actually with a little story of what I think got me into this, more than my dad or my relationship to my grandfather or the work I did. Probably quite a typical story for a lot of guys. So in about 93, I think I was in a basic counseling skills foundation year or something like that. Like most of these groups, there was 23 women and 2 guys. And I came in on the Monday morning, still half asleep, and sat down in a chair, random chair, and the facilitator said, "Right, turn to the person to your left." So I turned to my left. There was this sitting next to the guy. You know, I hadn't planned it or whatever. And the facilitator said, "Right, find a way to physically hold each other." And I was like, fucking great. I've got 23 women and I picked them. And I felt really, but he sat with, I think, his back against the wall and his kind of legs and his arms open. And I lay back with my back against his chest, and he put his arms around me. And it's one of those little things that the facilitator would never have known. It's just a warm up that and it's an overused phrase in therapy world, but I would say that changed my life, because I don't know if I'd ever been touched by a man. I'd shaken hands with my dad when he dropped me off at boarding school. That was kind of the extent of physical contact I'd had with a man. My grandfather used to carry me when I was a kid when we'd go for a walk and I'd be tired or whatever. But it's the first time I was embraced by a man.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
And the first time, and I remember actually leaning against him, and after my kind of awkwardness, kind of sinking into it, going, "Wow, I like this. There's something really strong and powerful and soft and tender that
Mm.
I've never experienced before. And quite soon after that, I was like, fuck, I didn't pick a woman, because if I had, I'd be going, oh shit, am I leaning on her breasts? Is this appropriate? You know, all that kind of new man stuff of I mustn't offend anyone. And I was able to just be held, and it taught me something. It taught me something very profound,
Mm.
just without words.
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story. I totally can relate to that, and also what you said about tenderness, because that's also how I would describe this quality that we're discovering as men more and more. And as you say, it's quite something when men also allow themselves to express their love for each other physically. You know, whether it's a hug or we'll even kiss each other sometimes. And we do a retreat every year, where we go in depth for about a week. We're going to do 10 days this year, and the last one we had a kind of party at the end, so there we all were dancing together, and it was, yeah, but there was also something very, very tender, because the men weren't just dancing in their isolated space, in their shed, so to speak. We were dancing together, and also quite intimately at times. And it's so liberating. I mean, all the men find it so liberating to be able to express this tenderness, and also allowing each other to be supported, as you were saying, to be held, yeah, and I think it's interesting what you brought up, because in terms of this whole masculine, feminine labeling, yeah, I think the problem is that, of course, we think masculine, we think men, we think feminine, we think women, and it's my experience that what we could call the feminine pole, as you said, even taking part in a men's group is, yeah, it's inherently feminine, in the sense that it doesn't go along with the usual masculine archetype of being alone in your shed, being the lone wolf. But I think it's a side of who we are as men that doesn't get supported, doesn't get nurtured, and isn't really allowed. We all grow up never experiencing it. I can relate very much to what you said about the handshake. And so it's one way to language it is it's the men's feminine side, but however we language it, I mean, one way I sometimes language it, I don't know if you've heard of Shiva Shakti, which comes from the Hindu tradition. And what I like about that is that it's two poles. You can't have Shiva without Shakti, and the Shakti pole is more about creation, relationship, sensuality, and the Shiva pole is more about strength, presence. And you could broadly say that correlates to some sense of masculine, feminine. But then, of course, women have both those poles in their makeup as well. So, yeah, it's really, I think, discovering this vulnerability and this tenderness is such a precious thing.
Well,
And
we've got to deal with our. I was talking to a friend of mine who's probably fair. She would probably describe herself as a feminist. She grew up in the kind of bosom of feminism in the 60s and 70s, and she said to me, well, the trouble is, of course, is women are very misogynistic. And I was like, what did you just say? I wouldn't dare say so. I wouldn't even think it, let alone say it. What does that even mean? And she said, well, the minute a woman says to a man, man up, you're oversensitive, you're too sensitive, that's misogyny, because it's a kind of prejudiced, negative view of these feminine traits, what we call feminine traits. And that kind of spun me out. I was like, oh, wow, that really makes sense. And of course, our misogyny isn't just directed at women, it's directed at ourselves. I shouldn't be tender, I shouldn't
Right.
be vulnerable,
Right.
you know. So I think it's really important for men to understand, because I often think, why the fuck would any man give up? Yeah, right, you've got all the power, you get paid more than anyone else. Why would you give that up? You know, it's not an easy sell. If you say to men, because it's destroying you, or it's destroying half of you, not to mention your relationships, that might incentivize them to do this work a little bit more.
Mm.
And I think it's a really interesting way to look at it. You know, that these parts of ourselves need to be, equality needs to be within ourselves individually as much as socially.
Yeah.
You know, we need to honor these parts of ourselves, and you know that we're stuck with masculine and feminine. I'd rather we could call it green and blue. That would make it less,
Yeah.
you know, contentious. But we're stuck with them, so we've got to work with that.
You know. And would you say, I'd be curious to know if in this vulnerability and tenderness that you and the men there have been discovering, do you also find that there's a different kind of strength that comes online also? You know, but it's a strength that's sourced in this vulnerability. You know, not in well, I'm a man, so I should know who I am and where I'm going, and I don't need anybody. You know, this kind of facade of male strength. You know. Because it definitely came through in some of the men in the documentary that you made. You know, because I could tell it seemed like a lot of them had been through a really hard time. You know, had some really big challenges in life, and you could feel this tenderness, this vulnerability, this softness, but also this strength, this sense of being on purpose. You know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different strength to the one that is portrayed in kind of archetypal Hollywood, Stallone, Schwarzenegger kind.
Of course, yeah.
Tough, unfeeling strength, you know, which I think is utter bullshit. Really, I think it's a false idea of strength. You know, there's a strength that comes from going into the underworld and emerging a bit singed,
Right.
a bit frayed at the
Yeah.
edges, but having confronted some demons,
Yeah.
having broken a few times. The very, very first workshop I ever did, way back in the early 90s, I remember the guy very casually, as he was doing the introduction to the workshop, he said, well, I think that was around about my third nervous breakdown. And that touched me. I was like, because I think I was having my second at least. And that touched me. I was like, oh, wow, because you seem like quite a cool guy. You seem to really kind of have a presence that I'm not familiar with. You know, he had a certain authority that came from his wound rather than his invulnerability, which,
Right.
you know, I don't know. I'd struggle. Maybe if we sat here for a few days, we could come up with a few ideas or thoughts. But I struggle to think even now of really good portrayals of vulnerable men in mainstream media. You know,
Oh yeah, hardly seen.
not there, is it? Really?
No.
You know, what you got? Tom Hanks shedding a couple of tears in Saving Private Ryan, and then getting back to killing people like men are supposed to do. You know, I think this is still very much the main message to men, and then we wonder why we're all running around killing each other and punching each other, and you know, it's fed to us in so
Right.
many ways. And I did the very first screening that we did of the film we did in New York with a friend of mine called Sebastian Junger, who's he supported us a lot, and he writes quite a lot about, you know, I suppose masculine issues. And there was a veteran there who was in the film Restrepo that he made about the troops in Afghanistan, and he stood up at the end and he said, where are the statues, where are the monuments, where are the memorials for the tender men, you know, the passionate, soft gentlemen? We're putting statues up to war heroes, which maintain this idea of that's you know, fair enough. I don't say we shouldn't, but where are also the statues for the gentle, soft, tender? We're not doing that, and so we're continually reinforcing this idea of false idea, I think, of toughness. It's not entirely false. I mean, there's value to being unfeeling. If you want to go into war, if you want to go down a coal mine, if you want to go up against a woolly mammoth, I think it's got its uses. We lost, and this is something my wife referenced in that she directed the film with me. In the film, the rituals that we used to have when men would come back from war, they would pray, brought back in, you know, kind of had the war washed off them so they could return to a civilian life. And we're not doing that, you know. That stopped we forgot that a long time ago.
Yeah, I was moved by that, and I also read something about that. Yeah, that's something the women would do when the main men came back from war, and then they would be able to reintegrate.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I totally agree with you. That this kind of, we don't really have any positive sort of archetypes, role models even with our postmodern, you know, culture. I guess one of the problems that I see is that some men who become more progressive, you know, more what might call themselves spiritual, they can tend to, we have a phrase for it, become sensitive new age nice guys, or snags for short, and kind of you know, have this kind of persona of being a gentle, you know, sweet, tender guy. But it's a persona, you know, it's a mask, and it's often in response to, in unconscious reaction to, actually, all the messaging we get as men these days, and especially since the feminism, you know, in that sense of, well, men are the cause of everything that's wrong. So a lot of men, I mean, I also see this in my own history, but I've known and worked with many men who really need to bring on, you could say there's a dual aspect to the work. One is this tenderness and vulnerability that we've been talking about, you know, really opening up authentically, you know, not just putting on an act of being, you know, a sensitive guy. But then there's the fact that so many of these kind of men have denied their masculinity to whatever degree and for whatever reason. And especially these days with this whole kind of messaging that masculinity itself is toxic, you know. So what we're finding in our work is it's kind of this dual process of inhabiting, on one hand, this really beautiful tenderness, and giving ourselves to love, really, and learning to feel as men in a way that we didn't even know was possible, you know, because in so many ways we're just brought up to be kind of cut off. And so that's one side of it, is this magnification of love, of tenderness. But then on the other side, we do quite a lot of work with bringing online this authentic male strength and warriorship that's sourced in this vulnerability, you know, and that actually brings great joy and aliveness, you know, that you can experience this tenderness with a brother on one hand, and then, you know, then you can do some wrestling together.
Don't you think then that kind of new age sensitive man thing is in itself quite patriarchal or misogynistic, in that it's like men trying to be like 1950s housewives? It's a kind of 1950s housewife idea of femininity and softness. And I probably piss a lot of people off from saying this. I'm always terrified of talking about gender, but we're here. it strikes me that what happened in the 60s was women got permission to cut their hair short, wear trousers, and get a job.
Yeah.
Be like men.
Yeah.
Men got permission to grow their hair long
And wear beads
and wear beads and
earrings.
And so they were allowed to be kind of the soft, gentle. But where's the celebration of, you use the word warrior, of the warrior side of femininity? Where's, you know, I mean, you're talking about Shiva and Shakti. I've got Kali, you can't see it.
Oh yeah,
On my
that's
forearm.
nice.
I think it's quite good to have her on my side. You know, that's
The goddess of destruction.
That's a wild, wild, powerful, you know, powerful
Yeah.
side of femininity. And like I say, my finger's not entirely on the pulse with these things, but as an amateur, at least an amateur man, I think there's still something incomplete about that. And so for me, if I was gonna try and embrace that wildness, that would feel more complete.
Yeah.
Than that insipid version that I,
yeah,
that's what I would describe it as, non-threatening. And when I was trying to be that, which I was, probably in my 30s, I would say I had neutered myself. I was pretty apologetic for my masculinity. I wasn't really feminine. I wasn't really anything. I was just saying sorry, I'm a guy, and I'll try not to be. I'll try not to threaten you. I'll try not to be a problem. Trying to make up for what my dad did. And I don't, you know, I talk about that at the beginning of the film, you know, in terms of, you know, all men are potential rapists. And when I was going, I'm not. When I eventually went,
I am.
if that's the truth, and I'm a man, all right, but I won't do it. I'll just take ownership of it, and I won't do it rather than just cut my cock off and try and be as non-threatening as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's a good example, that whole arena of sexuality, because yeah, a lot of spiritual nice guys, you know, they're in denial of their sexuality, or at least you know, an authentically, on occasion, wild expression of it. And so that's one aspect that we've actually gone deeply into, you know, and continue to.
I mean, just at the risk of pissing even more people off, I'll talk about Jordan Peterson, which I talked about on the Rebel Wisdom thing. I think I did as well, but I find it it works for me in this struggle to pull all this stuff together into something that's useful as a roadmap. And
yeah,
he wasn't talking about masculinity. I've kind of nicked it. But he was talking about Christ's Sermon on the Mount. Have you seen that thing?
no.
He's talking about the shadow. And he said he was looking, I think he did a series of lectures from the Bible, in the New Testament, and one of them was about the Sermon on the Mount. And so he said he felt conflicted with this idea that, you know, blessed are the meek, which is another good word for a kind of New Age spiritual man.
Exactly.
Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And he was like, well, why? What have they done to deserve that? And he looked into the original, I think the word is etymology, the original language, the original Hebrew and ancient Greek scriptures, and realized that, like a lot of them, they were mistranslated. And he said a more accurate translation is, blessed are they that bear arms, know how to use them, and keep them sheathed. And I thought,
wow,
do for me as a description of how to be a man in threatening, dangerous, all those kind of things, but in charge of it.
Yeah.
Able to carry a spear or a sword, but keep it, have the mastery and the self-awareness and the self-control.
Yeah.
Not to chop it off, not to deny it, not to go, I haven't got a sword, I'm safe, I'm all right.
Right.
I've got a sword, but I've done so much work on myself. I'm not going to pull it out indiscriminately.
Right.
I'm not just going to lose my shit and start chopping people up. I've got it in its sheath, but I've got a sword.
Yeah. That's a great way
for me.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. because like you said, it's to developing the mastery. Because like when you were saying, look, yeah, am I potentially a rapist? I mean, yeah, all of us men are, I think, if we're honest, you know. And but just green lighting that, and just together as men, and realizing we're all the same. That's another big part of the liberation we all feel, is when you can have one man who's going through a challenge, is on the hot seat, or we're looking at some particular area like, you know, aggression or sexuality, and then, you know, you just find, well, we can all relate to it. You know, some might have more of a tendency in one area a bit more than others, but there's nothing really personal about any of it. Nobody's got a personal problem. And then the more we're willing to say, yeah, I am part animal, you know, and there is that authentic warrior, you know. But as you said, through this process of vulnerability, actually, it's the process of vulnerability and bringing these things out into a collective that actually makes it possible for us to become masters of these impulses in a way that I just think would be very challenging if we're just trying to do it alone.
Yeah, to gain mastery, you have to go into those labyrinths. You have to be willing to, you know, the dangerous thing to me is to say, I'm not a killer, potentially. I'm not a rapist, potentially. I mean, all right, I'm going to be hypothetical now because I have no idea what I'm talking about in a true sense. But let's just theoretically say you take some Russians who are in, you know, in conflict at the moment. Let's go back 2 months, 3 months. If we sat them down and said, are you a rapist? Are you a murderer? I can almost guarantee you that they'll go no.
Mm.
You put them in the Ukraine, you get a bunch of their mates killed, or I'm not making excuses for them, but you put them in that unimaginable to me as someone who's only ever lived in a safe, you know, space. You put them into that horror, you animalize them or dehumanize them, or just put them in that kind of crucible.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing on the news is rape and genocide, right? Which, I'm not pointing the finger at Russians, that you can point the finger at any culture that's ever been in war and men rape and kill.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm certain that if you'd asked them a few months ago, they'd have gone, no, I wouldn't do that.
No, exactly.
I'd be one of the guys who would say no. And I've never been that comfortable. You know, these are very difficult existential philosophical questions that I think we need to ask ourselves. Would I be one of the good guys? Would I be one of the ones who disobeyed orders? Would I be one of the ones who didn't follow orders? Would I be one of the ones herding people into cattle trucks?
Right.
These are horrible questions that I think if you really want to be safe, if you want to have mastery, if you want to be able to keep that sword sheathed, you might not be able to answer 100%, but we've got to go there. And there was a book I read probably when I was a teenager about the Vietnam War, and there was a veteran who was saying, I went to high school, I dated cheerleaders, I drank milkshakes and played football, and then I was drafted and I was sent to Vietnam, and I was a door gunner in a helicopter, and I remember hovering over a village, and I must have personally killed about 100 people, women and children, who I knew were not Viet Cong. We were bored, and we went out in our helicopter and we shot the shit out of a village. No one told us what to do, because if the officers said something we didn't like, we'd shoot them in the back when we went to battle. So it was completely lawless. We had all the smack and all the dope we wanted. In that situation, I became a mass murderer. I then was sent back home to America. I got married. I had some kids. I got a job. I drink beer with my mates. I'm fucking normal now. And I found it in myself, and I wasn't unusual. I found that Mr. Hyde within myself, within that context. You know, John Pilger, the journalist, said, I read him a few years ago, he said, have you ever thought maybe we're not the good guys? And that's what's dangerous about the new age man thing. It's like, it's a denial, and that's not mastery. That's a removal. And you know, it's dangerous territory to go into, but it's more dangerous not to.
And how, in terms of working with that territory in your group, yeah, do you have anything you'd want to share about how you work with that? Is that something that will come out of you taking men through a process, or do you challenge them? Is there that context in your group where you can challenge each other very directly?
There's a culture. I mean, my groups. I've got 4 groups now. They've been running between 10 and I think the oldest group's 22 years old. The youngest one must be coming up for 10. There's a culture, I would say, that I guess comes from me, of shadow work and the permission to go dark and go to the dark places without being shamed or humiliated or
Right.
prosecuted, for it. There's an acceptance without a collusion. But I think that non-judgmental culture, that curiosity, I always say judgment belongs in the courthouse. It's fucking useless anywhere else. Judgment is designed to, you go to court, you've committed a crime or not, you're judged as guilty or not guilty. The function of judgment is to close shit down, which has its place, but that's not useful in a therapeutic situation. You don't want to be closing things down. You want to be opening up. So I think we have a culture of, so what was going on for you? What was happening? What was missing for you, or what was the thought process that got you to that place where you were insulting, or you got into a road rage incident, or you did more cocaine, or whatever the thing happens to be, without, like I say, without collusion, but without judgment. I think that's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
But there's no program as such. I mean, once a year, a bit like yourself, I take all 4 groups out for a few days into nature.
All together, the 4 groups come together. So how many guys would that be?
Well, in total, I suppose there's about 35, 36, so maybe 20, 25. Not everyone comes. It's hard to get that many people together, but the majority of them will come. And in that situation, we will do themed work. I mean, one of the limitations I find in my group work, because it's an evening every 2 weeks that each there's limitations to that. They're coming from whatever work they do, going home to whatever family. They're not going to fall apart. They're not going to lose their shit in a 3-hour group as a whole. So getting them out into the woods, into the countryside, away from their families, away from their phones and work, and really getting a bit more immersive. Then I will set a theme, which might be, one year we'll do vulnerability, another year we'll do the shadow. Last year we did anger work, so the baseball bats came out and let us screaming and shouting happen for 4 or 5. That kind of stuff is useful, but it's more a flavor or an atmosphere or to the culture of the work, where a permissiveness, you're not going to be ostracized. Because I think one of the biggest fears for human beings, if you think about the old punishment system, you got the death penalty, and then very close after that, you've got exile.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a very deep human fear. If I share my badness, I will be exiled from the tribe.
Yeah.
And to create a tribe where that won't happen, where you'll actually be brought in and supported to work through that toxicity. I just hesitate to use the word, but there's a reality.
Yeah.
Then I think that's the most helpful space we can create. That's there's no point in pointing the finger and judging. It's just
no.
Down, they hide.
Yeah.
They back off. They isolate.
And do you have men that you've been working with for a number of years now? I mean, the people who've stayed with you for a long time?
Yeah, I mean, the 22-year-old group, there's a guy who's been in 3 months shy of that.
Wow.
Most of that group, have been in 15, 20 years. Yeah, I mean, I think, the way I work as a therapist is I always say we got one relationship, us and the rest of the universe, right? And I tend to do long-term relationships, and that's reflected in my work. Um,
And so, obviously, because that's a long time. I mean, in terms of my group, I mean, there's a few guys who've been involved 9, 10 years. But yeah, I'm curious if over time, because I imagine people go through all kinds of breakdowns and breakthroughs together, and then you know, obviously there's transformation. Is an aspect of your collective in terms of the support. Would you and do you also challenge each other to live up to what you've seen in each other?
yeah.
I mean, this is yeah.
Yeah,
So you know, you can't
for that long. You can say
yeah,
to them, "Look,
yeah,
I know you're better than this, man. I
yeah.
know."
Well, come on, you're bullshitting. We've been here before. Come on. Yeah,
Yeah, you know,
yeah.
I mean, I have run lots of modular groups in the past and training programs and this that. It's just not my thing. You know, I think our wounds are also, perhaps you could say, our gifts, and so coming from a family of domestic violence and addiction as a kid, I guess I unconsciously became the person trying to hold it all together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's reflected on a good day. On a bad day, it doesn't always work. You know, we can have family fights and conflicts as well. They're not, you know, not unknown in a relationship that's that long.
Yeah.
Which is also part of the learning, the finding our ways through that. But yeah, I've always run groups. So when I left school, I had a little theatre company. Then I was in rock and roll bands, and then I was running a film crews. So I think right from year dot, I've been trying to hold the family together.
You get it. Yeah.
That's probably why my groups last so long, because I am creating brotherhoods and families.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that theme of brotherhood, because my sense is that your role as facilitator or leader is somewhat similar to mine, because I feel that you're both a brother to those men you work with, and you could say the facilitator, the leader, but it's both together.
Yeah, it's really, I still haven't figured it out. I was talking to my therapist about this about 10 days ago. This is so complicated because it would be so much easier if I just stepped back. Like, I'm in a men's group for myself, and the guy who runs it is a very good therapist, and he's very boundaried, and he won't have lunch with us, and he keeps his distance, and I can appreciate that. I just can't do it. I never have done. I never will do it. But it's my position is blurrier, and I suppose still trying to figure it out. Maybe they're still trying to figure it out. It's a kind of experiment that's 22 years old now. But I was talking to my partner about it recently, and I was saying I think I was trying to explain it to myself in talking to her about it. I was saying, if you get a plumber to your house, the plumber's not better than you. The plumber's not more important than you. The plumber's just good at fixing your toilet or your washing machine. And I like to see myself as the plumber in that sense of, I'm not more important than them. I'm not better than them. I've just got a certain skill set.
Yeah.
That, to be honest, I'm trying to give away. I'm trying to share. I mean, the 22, actually all the groups are pretty good. The 22-year-old group, the 18-year-old group in particular, there are times, very rare occasions where I've been like, I run a retreat in Nepal, so once a year I'll go away. There are occasions when they'll meet without me. I know they'll do a really good job. And in fact, one of the things that keeps me interested and excited after all these years is seeing one of them spot something that I've missed.
Yeah, exactly.
They are really good.
Yeah.
And they'll spot shit because I've got blind spots. That's why another reason I trust groups. I think that's what I'm saying. As a one-to-one therapist, you could work with me for 20 years and there's going to be blind spots. There's going to be things I haven't worked through in myself.
Yeah.
Missing you. You come into a group, someone's going to spot something.
Exactly.
Can't get away with shit in that situation.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree.
I think it's very safe.
Yeah. Yeah, we experience this. We often call it this collective intelligence. You know, the intelligence of the collective. You know, that is greater than the sum of the individuals.
Yeah.
You know, so you know, several individuals might be giving their input, but it's like, yeah, that collective, the circle is like an organism that's on a seek and destroy mission, you know, for any bullshit. and yeah, yeah, like you say, it's amazing to me also, you know, even though I've had a lot more experience than most of the men I'm guiding, is, yeah, when they see an angle that I just wouldn't have picked up, I'm always just really happy about that. I'm like, yes, and I'm always encouraging them to step up and say, look, this is why you guys need to speak up, because you might be picking up on things I'm not going to pick up on. You are also responsible for this process, you know.
Well, and the buzz for me of playing music is you're creating an audio frequency that can only be made by 4 or 5 people. You can't do that on your own. You're Bob Dylan if you do it on your own, which is fine. But I'm not. I'm interested in that collective thing, and the buzz when you've got 4 or 5 people or 10 people or however many, all focused on making that one song come together. That collective experience, and a group when it's firing on all cylinders is exactly the same buzz for me. Like,
yeah.
We're in a zone now where
exactly,
something's happening that couldn't happen with one person.
Yeah, that's it. You know, I interviewed this guy, I don't know if you've heard of him, Jed Diamond. No, he's written a number of books. He's actually been involved with men's work since 1969. He'd been in a men's group for 43 years. Incredible. And he mentioned this phrase that came from Robert Bly, who was one of the guys, poets, you know, is very involved with the Mankind.
Iron John.
Yeah, Iron John, that's it, yeah. And it was, the phrase was the song, is it the sound that male cells sing? You know, and when I heard that phrase, I was like, yeah, that captures something about this, the brotherhood, you know, that there's some quality there that if there was one woman sitting in the circle, it wouldn't be there. Yeah. And, you know, earlier on when we were talking about, you know, we could describe the whole impetus to be in a group as men and to be vulnerable as being feminine. But then we were saying, yeah, but it's a feminine that's quintessentially masculine. It's something it's a feminine that we experience of men that's different from how women would experience. And yeah, to me, that is the thing that lights me up the most. That's the magic, you know, and that's when you feel something in the room, you know, like a new being, you know. It's like the sum of all of you as men and a kind of intelligence and a tenderness and a unity, you know, that's yeah, it goes beyond any of us as individuals, and also goes beyond me as the leader.
Yeah, and it's that collaborative thing rather than a competitive thing, isn't it? It's transcending that.
Yeah, and I think that was part of your documentary. I found the most moving is towards the end, when they're just talking about the experience of the brotherhood, and yeah, it's just a very profound spiritual. This is where I feel the word spiritual comes in, because it's when there's something touched into and expressed that goes beyond any individual's stuff, you know, and where we find ourselves most deeply coming together. Yeah, and that's interesting to hear also about something. So would you say what's also developing in your groups over time is what we could call natural hierarchy or a growth hierarchy, where the guys who have more experience, you know, if you go off and do your retreat in Nepal, you know, they're going to step up quite naturally because they've got more to give. Yeah, and then it's not all,
like I say, it's, you know, it's something that's an experiment, and so I guess, you know, hopefully after I've been running them 43 years, I'll be able to look back with a bit more awareness. But I'm trying to dismantle a conventional hierarchy without dismissing the idea of leadership.
Yeah, exactly.
which is clearly important to them.
Mm.
But it's, I guess we're working with power, you know, and
Yeah,
power. If you want to talk about abuse or, you know, toxicity, it's the abuse of power or the mismanagement of power
yeah,
is so problematic, you know,
yeah.
globally. I think it's a heady drug that a lot of people,
Mm.
when they get a taste of it, go a bit insane. So I
Mm.
guess we're playing with semi-consciously again ideas of power and how to distribute it without
Mm.
being dominant. You know,
Yeah.
that's something that's definitely not tolerated in the culture of what we're doing is
Mm.
dominance.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I hadn't actually put those things together, but yeah, the whole natural hierarchy model, you know, that something very fluid. Yeah, it's really working with a healthy distribution of power, you could say, you know, not denying power again,
Exactly.
you know. And some of us are more, you know, we have that capacity to lead and guide others for whatever reason, you know, just like you said you
That's
did.
definitely part of. I mean, I've got about 6 or 7 guys training up to run groups alongside, you know, guys who've been in groups of mine for a long time.
Mm.
And I think that's something that I would find hard to train into them. There's lots of things I can teach people consciously or share with people consciously. I don't know how to share or teach anyone how to put a group together because that's
Right.
very. I could give people some tips, but I think it's something I'm quite good at. Probably from trying to hold the family together. I'm quite good at I'm quite good at putting a band together, and a good band is not about finding the best musicians.
Yeah.
A whole load of ego shit going on, right?
Right.
A really good band, if you look at really good bands, they're not
Rolling
really
Stones. I'm going. I'm a guitar player too, by the way, and I've been
right.
in a few bands. So I'm going to go and see the Rolling Stones on June 1st. You know, it's their
Fantastic.
60th anniversary.
Yeah,
They're playing in Madrid. Jesus, it was expensive. That was 360 euros a ticket. But that, you know, there they are, like 78 years old, and you know, they're not the best musicians per se,
there's no
but
way.
what they do together, you know, that's a great metaphor. Also,
Yeah.
it's like how
It's
they weave together.
chemistry. It's
Yeah.
chemistry, right? And I think I'm quite good at chemistry, and I think that's a really important thing. And you want a good mix of a few people who are going to really step up, a few people who are going to sit in the middle, a few people who are going to be quiet. But occasionally, I mean, the quiet guys are amazing to me. They're the ones who'll sit there for a year, not say something, and then they'll suddenly open their mouths and just cut across all
Yeah.
and stop everyone in their tracks. And
You suddenly realize they've been paying attention for 5 years.
yeah, and what's fascinating, I mean, you know, there's a couple of guys that have been in groups with me for decades who hardly ever say a word, but when they don't show up, the group's not the same. You can feel it. There's just
It's the
something
presence.
So it's about presence as much as anything. But getting that right mix of people is I was going to say it's an art, but I don't even know how I do it. It's something I feel blessed that I'm quite good at that.
Yeah.
And I did try once. I put a group. I thought, oh, I'm being too selective. It's not fair. I'm just going to put the first 8, 10 guys that show up in a group. And I did that as an experiment. They fucking hated each other. It lasted about 6 weeks and all fell apart. So I thought, maybe I should stick with my instincts. You know,
Yeah.
seems to be working out.
Yeah. And maybe to finish, maybe I'd be interested to hear why you wanted to make that documentary, Make Me a Man. Yeah, what do you feel most proud of in terms of that documentary, in terms of what it puts across?
And I wanted to make it because, ego, actually. That's it, the real honest truth, ego, because I got together with this amazing woman who's a filmmaker, and she just made a film, and I was jealous, and I thought, I want to make a film as well. She's getting loads of attention. That's the base part of it.
Okay, that's very honest.
The
Good.
next part of it, I haven't told her yet, so I better not show her this when you put it up. But a deeper, more important reason, other than my own fragile ego, was I recognized I'd kind of plateaued. I have 4 groups. They're all full. People stick around, so there was no point in even putting people on a waiting list. And it's like after nearly 3 decades, I'm able to reach 30, 35 guys.
Yeah.
It's not, my supervisor told me, and again, it sounds like a big ego thing. He's like, I think you've probably got the biggest men's group practice in Britain. And I was like, oh, that's nice. And then immediately I thought, well, that's shit because that's 35 guys. If that's
Yeah,
the
that's
biggest,
not big enough.
you know, I don't even know if it's true, to be honest, but it's clearly it's one of the bigger ones.
Mm.
But the realization of how few people I could reach, I think I and I was sitting in here in this room. This is where I do my thing. So I was sitting here one night and I looked around. I've often been approached by TV companies wanting to make film what I do, and I've always said no because I don't think they'd get what we do because it's like you bring a camera in, it's going to change the dynamic.
Exactly.
I work with a lot of people in media, and I looked around the room and I realized, wow, we're a film crew. You know, you're a cameraman, you're a sound guy. We could do this ourselves. So without any real thought or planning, we got together, I think the next Saturday, we got a few of the guys together and asked them some questions and started filming it. And I thought I'll just put the clips on YouTube. And quite soon after that, I thought if I make this film, kind of in competition with my girlfriend almost, I'm going to do something really defensive as a man.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not all bad, you know. It'll come from that place, which I can get into. So I invited her to come on board and direct it with me. Because I just thought we need a woman's perspective on this. We need a woman's inquiry. We need a woman's challenge. We need a woman's input in this. And I think it's back to Shiva and Shakti. I think what I'm most proud of in the film is I think we nailed it. I think we got that balance. It's not a pro-man thing. It's not an anti-women thing. It's a human presentation.
Totally.
Bunch of guys who have done some work on themselves, presented by a man and a woman who were collaborating.
Yeah. Yeah, you just said it. That's what really struck me about it was the humanity, just the raw humanity of it, over and above it being about men.
Yeah.
But it was quite something to feel that raw humanity coming through all those men, you know, and the whole spectrum, because they're quite a bunch of different characters as well. Yeah, and then the other thing, as I said, that really impacted me was this whole backdrop of the war and war memorial. And yeah, maybe just to finish, is that a dimension that you've really touched into in your work with men? Is that there's this deep cultural wound or shadow that even if men haven't, you know, as you know, people like us, we're very fortunate to have lived relatively comfortable lives, but still that shadow getting carried down through the generations. And
I think it's a massively defining part of my life, and therefore it's reflected in my work. In a literal sense, I've taken guys out to the old First World War battlefields because they're so emotive. Trying to crack through some of that tough exterior, it's a great place to just go and walk and be outside and be together and walk through graveyards or through battlefields. And I haven't met a man yet that isn't touched by that. So that's a kind of creative manipulative technique. You know, a lot of times manipulation is just in a benign way.
Yeah.
But in my own history, you know, I was raised I had a very close relationship to my maternal grandparents who raised me a lot of the time when things weren't going well with my mum and dad. And they were born just before the First World War. They were old enough to see the older kids go off and not come back.
Yeah.
And I think it really formed them. And I got a really, really strong message from them. Do not trust authority. They will get you killed.
Wow.
Trust yourself. Listen to yourself. Don't follow leaders. You know, it's that kind of quite rebellious, defiant people. You know, they would shout at the TV if the Queen or Margaret Thatcher came on. They were quite left wing, but I think it really formed them, and that influence of, yeah, listen to yourself, trust yourself first, don't blindly follow.
Yeah.
Really influenced me. So I think that's in there as well. And then, as I point out, as I state in the film, just my grandfather was a very soft, very loving man, but he wasn't, he wouldn't cry. And it was only I think a week before he died that he broke down, and as I said in the film, he kind of waited till the women went out of the room. It was just me and him sitting by his deathbed. He started crying, and I was like, "What's up?" And he was like, "Why did I get 60?" It touches me now.
Yeah.
Why did I get 65 years more than my friends? And it just broke my heart, because I thought, fuck, you've never said that. You've lived for 65 years without sharing that survivor's guilt. And what is
that was so moving.
Relationship, silence.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a really, really moving point in the film, and just how these guys could carry this kind of guilt their whole lives, and not really realize how it's shutting them down on so many levels. Well, I loved it, Jerry. So I'm gonna show that your documentary to my men on our men's retreat coming up in June. So
fantastic, thank you. Yeah, and that's why I made it, right? Just hopefully someone will see it somewhere, and who haven't thought about starting a men's group, and will start it. And if it does that, great.
Yeah,
it's worth doing.
Yeah, I feel the same way with the documentary we're doing.
Please keep me informed about that.
Will do. Yeah. All right. Well, great to speak with you, Jerry.
Thank you.
All the best, and keep on keeping on.
Yeah. All right, man. Thank you.
Ciao. Ciao.